like to bring up more video evidence from Senator Tester.
Thank you, Madam President. Back in 2012, the people of Montana stood up against the influence of corporations and big money in elections. By a 3-to-1 margin, they called on their congressional delegation to introduce a constitutional amendment overturning the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. That ruling paved the way for more secret money in politics. It allowed corporations to make contributions to political campaigns, on the grounds that corporations should have the same right to free speech as any individual. In response to the overwhelming vote by the people of Montana, I proudly introduced this amendment, which affirms that what we all know. Corporations are not people, and they do not have the same rights as you or me. 2 years later, Americans are realizing that Montanans were pretty forward-looking. That's because in Montana we value independence, we value our individual rights, and we don't think a faceless entity should be able to tell us what to do. We don't like it when secretive, shadowy groups tell us how to vote, and we don't like it when corporations dictate our healthcare decision. But that is exactly what happened with last week's Hobby Lobby decision. The Supreme Court decided that corporations can limit their employees' healthcare options, thereby restricting our individual freedoms. That is un-American. Affording corporations the same constitutional rights to speech and now to religion that Montanans and the all-American people cherish is the exact opposite of what our founding fathers envisioned. This is not freedom. It is a slippery slope to granting large corporations greater power over everyday Americans' lives.
Now, it seems very peculiar that Senator of Montana has decided that there is secret money being funneled in by corporations. However, there's clear evidence that the funding given by corporations are clearly going to certain campaigns. So the secret money argument makes absolutely no sense for the prosecution. However, let's continue on and move on to the fact that he clearly stated that corporations are not people. However, I'd like to turn your attention to an 1886 case, County of Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific Railroad, where corporate personhood was legitimized as constitutional. Therefore, the prosecution is clearly making a contradicting argument saying that corporate personhood is not legal, and they're assuming that Senator Montana was an expert in this opinion. However, he clearly neglected the fact that the Supreme Court has already ruled corporate personhood as a constitutional precedent for the past 100 years.
Does the prosecution have any further witnesses?
Okay.
Oh, my bad. Sorry.
All right, so once again, the defense fails to bring up any evidence. All they tell you is that this is not happening. Whereas the prosecution actually has evidence to support this. In the year 2012, $256 million was funneled by corporations into social welfare groups. And guess what? Social welfare groups do not have to disclose their donors. That is the very definition of secretive money. So you just stated a blatant lie here in the court that was backed up by absolutely no facts or statistics. In addition, you're once again invoking precedent when the Supreme Court has already set the precedent. We're simply arguing that the precedent is not the right precedent to set, so your argument has no relevance.
The prosecution would like to present the last piece of video evidence from Noam Chomsky.
Corporate personhood is a real scandal. Corporate personhood is an interesting doctrine. I mean, it goes back to the 14th Amendment, which is very, I'm sorry to bring up too much history, but this stuff is really enlightening. You go back to the 14th Amendment, right after the Civil War. Its core principle is that no person can be deprived of rights without due process of law. Actually, there's something like that in the Fifth Amendment. This expanded it. And the intention, of course, was freed slaves. If freed slaves cannot be deprived of their rights, well, it was never applied to freed slaves. Almost entirely it was applied to corporations. They're not to be deprived of their rights without due process of law. Over the years, the concept of corporate personhood became elaborated. It wasn't really established firmly until about a century ago. And it was not done by legislation. It was courts and lawyers. And incidentally, the progressives were behind it. The progressives strongly supported it. Part of their support for what are called organic institutions over more important than individuals. So Woodrow Wilson and the rest. What it means is that the meaning of the 14th Amendment was expanded so that person included corporations. And over the years, corporations have gotten rights that are way beyond those of persons of flesh and blood. So if you go, say, to the Clintons' free trade, so-called free trade agreement with Mexico, it has nothing to do with free trade, that's what it's called. It grants corporations rights that human beings can't even dream of. Like, for example, if General Motors invests in Mexico, they have to be given national treatment, meaning treated like a Mexican business. That's one of the ways to make sure that Mexican business is destroyed and get big immigration here. Incidentally, the Clinton administration understood that. They knew they were going to wipe out the agricultural system and business in Mexico, and in fact in 1994, when NAFTA was passed, Clinton started militarizing the border. It had been an open border before, they started militarizing it for obvious reasons. Well, that's the expansion. Of course, if a Mexican human being appears in New York and demands national treatment, let's talk about it. But corporations, these are among the rights that go way beyond persons. At the same
Prosecution still fails to realize is that even though they're trying to argue the precedence was still set. And now with that in mind, with the prosecution trying to sue the Supreme Court itself over one single case, we have to look to all the tens of cases that have been that have set the precedent, that have been set in precedent by the Supreme Court, including for the past 200 years, as their expert opinion has stated, from 1809. 1884, 1853, 1886, 1898, 1977, 2010 with the Citizens United case, and the Hobby Lobby case in 2014. So there's clearly multiple sets of precedents set by the Supreme Court, and if they're trying to prosecute the Supreme Court off of one case where where corporate personhood has already been legitimized, it makes absolutely no sense on the prosecution's. The notions by the prosecution make absolutely no sense in that point.
I want to remind the court that this trial is not about precedents. This trial is about whether the outcome of the Citizens United decision enabled corruption and eroded fundamental American democracy, like principles of American democracy. The defense keeps coming up here and saying that corporate personhood has been legitimized in multiple cases, but they completely drop the two things that I say in my opening statement, which is first, even if that's true, corporate personhood is irrelevant to this case because we're talking about the impacts of the decision, not the bad decision making that led up to this. But second, if you don't believe that, corporate personhood is proven to be extremely harmful. When GM was implicated in the deaths of 13 people when their ignition systems failed in the cars that they produced, I asked the defense this one question: if GM was treated as a person with the same individual rights as they were being said as they had in corporate personhood, why aren't they sitting in a jail cell for manslaughter? This is specifically what we talk about, where we say that individual rights do not necessarily transfer to individual responsibility.
Okay.
The prosecution rests, Your Honor.